All right, welcome to the May 18th budget workshop. In council chambers tonight, we have Councillors Kenny, Laraway, Berthasol, Marks, myself, Councillor Wingard. Councillor Demerit will be joining us remotely, and we're joined by our town manager and senior public safety staff. Before we begin, two quick things. One, in our budget workshop that we held on Monday, we covered a lot of material, and I wanted to thank Councillor Marks for sending us an update on some of the material she had provided for us. So if you haven't seen that, that should be in your email. We also had a free-ranging discussion about a lot of budget issues, and one of the things that came out of that was a number of councillors talking about the needs of constituents. And I wanted us to be very clear on our language when we talk about the community of Orono. We are a board that represents the entire community. We don't have wards, we're a nonpartisan board. And so we should be cautious in our language when we're talking about my constituents or our constituents. We represent Orono universally. And I want to be clear that I believe that is all our intent, and I want our language to match our intent. So I wanted to clear up if there was any misunderstanding from anybody who was watching on Monday night. Now, it has been our practice throughout these budget workshops to begin with a review of the previous week's material to see if there was any feedback that we could give staff, if there was any discussion about, in particular, service level changes or other things that maybe are larger than the individual lines that we talked about at our last meeting. So we talked about all kinds of public service material at our last time. So if there's any feedback or any edits, changes, maybe now is a good time to talk about some of that material. Can revisit it. This isn't the only time we can talk about this, but I wanted to carve out a little bit of space in each of our budget workshops so that we don't feel like we only have one shot at it at the end. So that's the purpose here. So if there's stuff that we think we should be revisiting from last week before we move on, I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about those things. And I just received a message from Councillor Demerit. He's going to join us when he can. He's not able to join us right now, but he'll be joining us soon. Well, let's.
I think I did have one actually. I was just still flipping through to try to find the right section because I wasn't. I didn't sort of preemptively remember that we'd have this opportunity at the start of council meeting. My question is in relation to, even though I'm still flipping to the right page, it's in relation to, and this may be something that it's best for me to kind of get into the weeds on, and I could follow up with Sophie on it sort of later individually if it doesn't make sense to discuss as a whole council. But I noticed on page 52, looking at the sort of increase in full-time salary for Parks and Rec, that's quite a big jump, especially in comparison to other salary increases that seem more modest through the rest of the budget. And I understand that there's you know, some promotions involved in there, and I certainly am excited to see Parks and Rec be well supported, but wanted to better understand the, you know, the rationale for what seemed like a really big jump, especially in comparison to, you know, the library staff, which is really maybe not even keeping pace with inflation. So I had a question about sort of equity of compensation and rationale for that.
So in Parks and Rec, you're talking about the departmental full-time wages line?
Yes, that's what jumped out at me.
So there are two things happening there. One, we are actually filling the Parks and Rec director position. We're promoting an individual who's currently a manager, which is managers are more like program managers as opposed to department heads that are endowed with a lot more responsibility, authority, and responsibility. The other thing that's happening there is when we had our program manager and we were focusing more on Parks and Rec as supporting community activities and not necessarily programming, we were covering more of that salary in the downtown and transit-oriented TIF district. So you're seeing two things switching there. You're seeing an increase in salary as well as because of a promotion, and also shifting more of the Parks and Rec director salary into Parks and Rec as opposed to downtown district.
Great. Yeah, thanks for knowing that right off the top of your head. And I will sort of follow back up with some of the other documentation that folks have been kind enough to supply and make sure that I wrap my head around it all correct. But that was my one question and reflection.
I think I have a follow-up question for
Sure.
that, actually. Just so with that promotion, who had been doing those parts of that job before that promotion? If obviously the person who's being promoted wasn't doing it, they're going to be paid more to do it. So who was doing it?
The Parks and Rec, the Director of Community and Economic Development was managing the supervisory management functions of Parks and Rec.
What is that going to free him up to do then?
Hopefully, managing we have a couple of very large development projects coming through. And some of the financial stuff that I have been doing that should probably flow down to him. The shift in the Parks and Rec system isn't just about freeing up his time. It's also about the fact that Parks and Rec department is taking on more programmatic work, which is not something that the downtown and transit-oriented TIF can cover. The economic development director's time is covered 100% out of the downtown and transit-oriented district. So we also have to be careful of how we allocate staff time to that TIF. There's absolutely nothing wrong, and many would say really awesome that we're focusing in Parks and Recreation on more programming, but those specific programming functions are not that's operations, general operations, and not qualified under the TIF.
I had a question that's maybe a little connected to that, looking through all the salary data that we were provided with the various pay bumps and how that's going to continue into 25. It looked to me like we're not tracking, it's not in the data I have. You're very well probably tracking it somewhere else, but I don't see any data that tells me anything about years of experience a person has in any specific job outside of with us. I mean, I can see, if they've been here for a while with us or not. Do we in fact have some kind of a system where when someone is hired, they're either started at, step one, meaning it's their first year straight out of college ever doing this job, versus their step 20, they've already done it for 19 years in another town and they're coming here. Do we have that? Because in looking at some of the salary data, it was a little surprising to me that I would see people that look to have very few years of experience and making quite a bit more than people who I know have lots and lots of experience. So can you talk a little bit about how we track that and how we actually pay for experience, not just a job title?
So we pay for experience, we pay for licensure. We pay for not just the job title, but within some of the jobs, there are differences in what they are doing in that overarching job. So for example, you could be an equipment operator. We have somebody right now who's hired technically as an equipment operator on a conditional hire based on within a certain amount of time getting licensure, commercial driver's license. But also there are in that particular field several allowed or offered certifications. Each certification would give you a little bit of a bump. So it's for that one in the union setting. I don't know where you're looking. So
I was just looking across it all.
Yeah. In the union setting, we have stipends for you're hired as a firefighter paramedic, but you come in with no medic. So you stipend your way up through that. Also, college degrees give you different steps. But when we bring somebody in, we don't necessarily start somebody at step one. Right. And it's not just years of experience, it's what that experience might have been. So somebody with 5 years of experience in front desk work in general might rank step 2. Somebody with 6 months of experience in a municipality that used our software system might rank a different step. So there, the other piece is we hire people to job titles and often have to train to those job titles.
So when someone moves up a job title, do they start at the bottom level for that new job title, or how does that work?
It really depends. Oftentimes, if they have been union versus non-union, on the union side, each job has its own pay scale, and you start at step 1 of each new pay scale. On the non-union side, I think about public works as an example. If you've been here for any amount of time as a public works worker 1, and you suddenly get moved to public works worker 2, the public works worker 2 pay scale does not start at the end of the public works worker 1. So you look at where they are on the 1 and you say they're moving to a 2, they should get a raise, but it's probably not going to be step 1 because they're probably already.
Okay, but that's all something that if anyone wanted to see, you have a tracking of what step people are hired at and what step they're at now.
So understand, yes, but it also is all on paper. It's not like.
No. Got it. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay.
Super helpful.
So,
thank you, Sonia, for the question.
So in terms, however, of major changes to the service level that we prospectively provide through this budget, I'm not hearing anybody wanting to engage in another discussion either at this time or later on about modifying that. However, we can come back to it. But I want to then maybe switch gears a little bit, talk about tonight's topic, which is public safety. We received really nice presentation from our public safety director about fire and stuff. And maybe it would be more appropriate to talk about that when we get to fire, but I don't want to shortchange anybody on that. So let's just start going through the sections as we normally do. And our first section starts on page 3 of this, and this is on public safety administration. And see if anybody has any questions or concerns regarding this section.
I wondered if you could, maybe old news, but I wasn't here for it. So could you talk about the difference of, it looks like there was a period where we had 2, and then we had 1. Yeah, 2.
So I can speak to that. We have been fortunate to have a very flexible person in public safety administration. So we had 1 for a long time. That 1, then we tried an experiment of splitting that person 50% public safety, 50% front desk when we had a problem with staffing at the front desk. So
downstairs.
Yep. And so we did that for a year. What we realized when we did that is the police department was not supported effectively. So now what we have is that person is back working full-time public safety, primarily supporting the police department. And we have 2 people downstairs at the front desk. It allows us to have 2 people at the front desk because when we're short, that person is still trained and can come over and backfill for us. So we had that for a while. Then when Jeff came on board, we started to really want data collection and support in the fire department to be able to keep up with what we were having to do with billing and program support. So we, at the same time, we were trying a part-time assessor. So we brought on a new person that did half-time in community development, supporting assessing, and half-time in the fire department. We went back to council through the next iteration of the budget and said, that's really not working. The fire department needs full, and we found other ways to support community development. So now there's 1 in community development, 2 in public safety, 1 supporting police, and 1
And are those interchangeable, fire and police? That are they not interchangeable, but cross-trained, so there's coverage and that sort of thing? And can those people also cover over here? Is there much cross-pollination going on?
Public safety person supporting police can do motor vehicle registrations, work the front counter downstairs to assist. Our public safety person supporting fire is supporting general assistance program. So Shelley is our general assistance administrator. And when numbers started going up and it became untenable for Shelley to continue to do all of that, we now are training that person to take over the general assistance or support the general assistance arm. So yes, in that those support people are helping with finance and administration, but it's not 100% cross-trained. You can't just throw them into any job. And quite frankly, I don't know that we want to pay in time and send people away to school to get those levels of training to do everything.
How long have we had 2, Sophie?
So off the top of my head, give me 1 second.
It looks like in 2020, the salary sort of wage from there to 2021, it almost doubled. So I'm assuming that would be when the new person came on.
So I can tell you when we hired the person we hired for that position.
In the meantime, I have a super easy little question. What is A/P, A/R?
Accounts receivable and accounts payable. Yeah.
What is that?
I thought that was universal. So I can tell you that person was hired in April of 2019. So it would have started as a half-time in both places and then work to full-time fire.
I had one more question on this part. I just was curious. I remember Chief Lowe talking at his previous presentation a couple of months back about fire and priorities. It was an excellent presentation, and public safety in general. I guess that was the community forum probably. And I remember one of the things that you mentioned, Jeff, was hoping to get all your policies and procedures actually online. I guess I'm figuring that's really an administrative task to get them online. I understand adapting them is not, but is it something we could set a goal of a deadline to get the existing ones up online? I'm just aware of community members who've sort of been asking for that for like about 3 years now. So I'm wondering if that's something we could, I'm just making it out.
I think that's something we should probably talk about. And it can probably go into our work plan.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Any other questions about administrative assistance? And are we ready to move on to the police department in general? Okay. All right, so let's talk about police. We have a presentation that talks about the service level that we are resourcing for. And so if there's any questions about that before we get into the lines.
Because I didn't see one from Chief Lowe. If he sent one
I emailed one out last night.
last night.
Oh,
But it wasn't about police.
I saw this
about
about
fire.
just
Just
about
fire,
fire.
not only fire, because that's where all the questions were coming from on Monday night. Now, Leo,
What's the
you are
subject?
just,
What's the subject?
It says background for public safety discussion, fire operations and response.
That's just something.
I don't know, it was about 8-ish last night that it went out.
I've got a hard copy here if you wanted to look at it, Leo.
And police, not fire.
We are on police.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a number of areas that are outlined as areas for discussion. We could start there. Okay. Capital request for 2 more Explorer hybrid vehicles. Questions?
I was just trying to understand the vehicle rotation thing. So we have 5 patrol cars total, 1's a spare and 4 are the like active ones. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we buy, one year we buy 2 and the next year we buy 1 and we keep alternating on that schedule. Is that right, Sophie?
Yes, 2-1,
Okay. 2-1, 2-1. So basically, I made myself a little graph. So basically then we're buying a new car. I mean, a specific car tends to last no more than 3 years. Is that right? They each kind of rotate out every 3 years and become the backup vehicle or get directed somewhere else.
Something closer to 4 to 5 is what we try to. Because we say the rotation is 2-1. We've had years past where we haven't been able to get 2, so we might just take 1. Okay. So every year when it comes in time for budget season, I kind of take a look at the fleet and we're looking at the mileage and the age of the vehicle and repairs and stuff like that.
Okay.
And that's when we would decide whether we need to stay on rotation of 2-1
Okay.
or whether or not we. So my big hope this year with staying on rotation is that if I can get these 2 hybrid cars, all 4 of my frontline cars are going to be hybrids. And I can say anecdotally, when I was tracking some gas mileage, the difference between gas and hybrid is, I would say, pretty significant. So I think we could see some savings in gas and stuff, like 10 to 12 for a gas car versus 16 to 18 for the hybrids that we have right now. So
I think the other piece of that, and I think you're kind of nibbling around the edge of when we've gone off cycle trying to save money by not buying a police cruiser, the problem that we've run into is we don't have the vehicles that no longer have enough life to be frontline emergency response, but do have life to be able to be the code car, somebody can take and use to go to the academy, or the life safety inspector's car. When we sat down trying to look at the fleet holistically and create, we ended up with an electric code car, new, for 2 reasons. One, we didn't have a car that we could rotate in, and that car was literally falling apart. And 2, at the time, we totally lucked out because they were doing these 3-year leases to municipalities with all sorts of grant money. So that car for 3 years cost us $324. When we're done with the lease, not this year, but next year, we will, when we looked at trying to fit that in and fit in the other cars that we know are not going to be able to be used for that administrative function, and you start trying to put that into a fleet plan where you're actually buying cars, it costs a lot of money. And it's a lot more than staying on rotation and being able to kick out and use up the rest of the life of those cruisers.
How many years do we keep them typically after they're not cruisers anymore? Do we keep them until they're factory warranty is gone? Do we keep them longer? What is our like?
We keep them.
One now. I know.
Yeah,
exactly.
We keep them until they are either breaking so much that it is costing us way too much money, or they won't pass inspection, or we know that there is a huge repair coming up that Richard is not going to be able to cobble together at the shop.
Okay, so if we stay on this rotation, we replace them, I can tell by the schedule, every 3 to 4 years. And if we get off it, then it becomes 4 to 5 or longer. But if we stay on this, each one gets replaced every 3 or 4 years, depending. Sort of a hiccupy kind of a schedule there. So 3 or 4. Got it.
Did we just put an engine in one?
We did that a couple years ago.
No, like we had, they said cylinders or something. I mean, which usually they don't repair.
Oh,
We did just
We
have a
just did that.
substantive repair, yes.
The one that went to Rock Cliffs, the first one.
I've had 2 frontline cars that I spent extensive amount of money on. My vehicle repair line right now is in excess of 7,000 over with time left to go.
Yeah, my point was, I know we just approved 5,500, which I assume was for an engine in one of these, 2020s probably, because I was appalled that they were like no warranty and all that stuff. But I assume that was an engine, correct?
It was.
It said in the report that there were cylinders, and I don't think anyone's messing with that.
It wasn't a complete motor, but it was plugs, wires, distributor caps. It was like a complete refresh of all the pieces around it. Exhaust manifolds, exhausts, all that stuff. We're finding that the parts and pieces and labor are becoming incredibly expensive to fix the cars too. Because our cars are averaging, we put 23,000 miles on each frontline car a year. So like I said, within a year and a half, they're out of their bumper to bumper warranty. It's not 3 years, it's 36,000 miles. We hit that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Both of our cars that we've just put on. So anecdotally, again, I could say both of the 2 cars that we've just put on this budget year, like around Thanksgiving time, November and December, they've already got almost 18 to 20,000 miles on them, because those other 2 cars that we had to put an extended amount of money in are down for an extended amount of time, which means those other 2 are getting driven constantly. So when we have down cars, other cars get used more, and there's this huge trickle down effect that's the type of stuff that just tends to chase us through budget years too.
This is maybe a question we don't talk about in public or something, but I am curious, just based on staffing levels, do we typically have 4 cruisers out at a time? Is that a normal thing to have 4 crew? And again, I don't know if there's stuff that you don't talk about at times here or not.
At nighttime, yep. More typically during the night, yeah. It's typical. Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, we would have 4 people on staff and they would all be out.
Vehicles.
Yeah. Sometimes even on Thursday nights. Thursday days and nights are my heaviest days, because it's when all of our shifts overlap. So I could have as many as 5 people working at a time. So, you know, either somebody will drive a spare car, or somebody will be in with somebody else, or we'll augment in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. This is a great rotation. It doesn't look like we've ever done 2 vehicles in a year based on these since 2020 to me.
So, I would say,
but we do have two 2022, so it doesn't quite make it doesn't add
so
up.
I will just say the cycle that is proposed by staff is always 2, 1, 2, 1. Unless, as Dan said, so if we look at a car and we say we think we can get through, that it doesn't make it to the budget that you guys see, but we always start out thinking it's going to be 2, 1, 2, 1.
COVID was what got us. So those 2 cars that you see there, 22, the 2 hybrids that we had, those were supposed to come. I think we went an entire budget. We did go an entire budget cycle without getting a car, because we couldn't get those 2 cars. So the other thing with these 2 cars that I have requested bids for is they're on the lot, ready to go to get them. So I can put them in service very soon.
Yeah, we've been 40 to 30 to 55, and now we're looking at 118. What does it? I hear that this is the best rotation. What does it do service level, do you think, as far as policing service level, if we go with one? Yeah, I guess it is again this year.
If we go one again, it just means that we stretch one of the other two 2020s longer than we would like. And it's already at probably almost 70,000 miles. So if we stretch it another year, you're looking to put another 30 some odd thousand miles on it. So once you get up around 100,000 miles, it's get expensive.
That's the spare. It's a 2017 with 97. That's what we call a spare, I guess.
Yep. So those ones. So I'm talking a frontline car.
Yeah.
These cars that we would be purchasing, we'd be moving. So most likely we would be looking at the fleet as a whole again and looking at what two we could repurpose elsewhere, like whether or not we put one in public works or we put one in community development or wherever. So if we only get one of the two frontline cars, it just means one of the two that we would be rotating out just stays on the line longer.
Yeah.
So to me, we run the risk. You run the risk of saying, could we? Yes, but I'm $7,000 over right now.
When we have tried to run the risk, we've blown motors and done other things.
And we're assuming I can get cars next year.
Okay, where's that one going to move down to?
So that one goes to Bob Yerxa out at Public Works. So one of the things we've done in an effort to try to save a little bit of money is instead of trying to keep facilities all in trucks, we are trying to have the facilities manager in one of the hybrids, one of the SUVs, which then allows us, Public Works just repurposed the WPCF truck that was no longer feasible to use for hauling flusher, but could be used for something else. So we're trying to kind of move those around and change people's impression of what is necessary in terms of truck versus car versus old versus new.
Jeff, before we leave this page, can I just ask the question I keep asking on every section? Which of these positions here are partly funded out of something that's not the general fund? Sophie, the Director of Community Policing is half-time out of the TIF, correct? Yep. And the Community Services Officer is full-time in the police budget, or are they also split?
So they're full-time in the community policing budget, but 100% of the expense, we bring in 50% of their salary in revenue from the RSU. So that is a collaborative position that's funded. The town pays all of the expense, but we are reimbursed essentially 50%.
Okay, so that's half funded by the RSU, and the Director of Community Policing is half funded out of the TIF.
And I just want to be really clear in case there are TIF police watching. The reason that
a lot of TIF stuff with the business community, right?
Does.
I read all about that. Lots of it. Yeah.
I just want to be really clear because most people hearing that we're funding somebody out of the police department with TIF might question that, but it's the type of work they're doing. It's the tasks. Thank you.
Maybe a way to move this discussion is to look at potential service level changes and see if that's something that that's on page 8.
Can I ask for one bit of information on that vehicle repair to find out if there was a new engine put in or not?
There was definitely not. It was not a new
Definitely
engine.
not.
Nope. It was. You have to still give me. We have the repair order, but it was definitely not a new motor. I know that.
There's all sorts of parts and pieces, but not a new
tons of parts and pieces.
Good suggestion, Jeff. And I'm sort of glad you opened the door to that, because I like the idea of whatever cars we do purchase this year being hybrid. I think that's wonderful. And I also sort of love the community policing model. I love seeing sort of police presence that's out being a sort of an active part of the community. And I think being not in cars, but being like a presence sort of on foot and perhaps on motorcycles or anything that kind of like takes away that bubble actually kind of increases approachability from my perspective as a member of the public. And so I don't want to, you know, I know that these systems are in place because they work on some level. And so I'm not trying to like throw everything out, but I am curious what opportunities you see to, you know, rethink how many patrols make sense and what could be, you know, creative uses of our officers in ways that are really kind of furthering our commitment to community engagement in various ways.
So I would say we have mountain bikes. That's the biggest way that we have right now.
And I saw that in one of the part of the budget that there was sort of a bike patrol, which I think is really cool. 2 or 3 years ago, we made an investment. Was it that long ago? A little while ago, we made an investment in a bike, and it's a really nice bike. And we do use it on nights when I was talking about with Councillor Kenny. If it was a Thursday night and I had 5 people on and it was a nice night, I think that that's an opportunity when we could get out and use those. So there is an opportunity. I'm not comfortable if I have 2 people working with putting one of them on a bicycle, because I can tell you anecdotally, I can think of an instance off the top of my head where we've had 2 officers out on a bike patrol at nighttime, and a disorderly complaint with fighting people came in, and I have 1 car with 1 person going to that and 2 people riding as fast as they possibly can on a bicycle to something like that. That concerns me. Yeah. So 2 cars would be the minimum to ensure kind of a speedy response to something. Yeah. So there's definitely an operational opportunity for us to implement that. Yeah. But I got to get some staff on board first. Right now, I do not have the capability to put people out on bikes because I don't have the staff. So, I mean, I'm all for motorcycles and mopeds and electric bikes and stuff like that. So if you guys wish for me to look at it, I'd love to have some motorized bikes around the fleet.
I mean, that would be environmentally advantageous. And I mean, even if we're not talking about like nighttime shifts where there's increased likelihood of disorderly conduct or things like that, like daytime shifts, I mean, what do you think about the feasibility of more like alternative modes of transportation for officers?
And perhaps in a way that sort of changes the configuration of our fleet so that maybe we had, you know, 3 rather than 4 patrol cars, and we're kind of filling in the gaps in other ways.
Yeah. So I like what you're talking about as far as getting them out of the bubble. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. I think that's a great idea. And I think there's a lot of value in what you're saying. And I don't know why, you know, we can't look, and I've actually made a note about this, why we can't look at having an officer a couple times a day stop down on Mill Street and just walk the neighborhood and say hello, you know, how you doing, those types of things to get that public presence. I think one of the things that you have to think about when we talk about alternate modes of transportation is the setup of the vehicles that they're actually in, and how they are in fact like a mobile office. You know, they have that computer in there, and you know, it's not necessarily watching YouTube or stuff like that. It's to do reports and to run licenses and those types of things. So that would really be outside of the 2 crews of normal patrol, which you're talking about, which again, that sets a good baseline, I think. I think that's a cultural shift that we're going to have to push. But I think it's definitely something to look at. There's a lot of value in that, like I said. Yeah.
I don't think moving below 4 fully equipped cruisers ready to go out would work, in that in February, you're not going to have somebody on a bike or a 10-hour shift. And when we're responding to things happening at one of the housing complexes that require 4 officers, they have to have a way to get there. And I think it is, if you look at the way the department is responding or how the department is is asked to respond, you know, they are covering all the way to Chalet, down to the basin, up to the housing complexes and along College Ave. And we don't have enough people on to be able to designate. If we had enough, if we had 5 people on Friday nights instead of 4 people on Friday nights, I think you could take somebody and say, your job is to be out, whether you choose to do it on a bike or by foot or cross-country ski, we don't really care. But it's to be out in the downtown village and high density area. You could say that. When we look at officer safety and operating procedures, it's not just officer safety in terms of their well-being. It's also the well-being of the people that they're interacting with. If an officer has adequate backup, can take time to connect with somebody, and isn't all alone in a space, their comfort level is going to stay where we want it to stay for them to be able to engage, diffuse, and practice their de-escalation techniques. An officer walking into a house party with 200 people all by themselves is, I don't know, I'm not an officer, but I wouldn't feel really comfortable with that. And when I don't feel comfortable, I'm probably going to be more defensive as opposed to receptive to using other techniques. So we do that not just for the physical safety of our officers, but also because I think it allows us to practice a much better type of, and quite frankly, I think it's the type of policing that Orono residents are asking.
One of the things that I've been aware of over the past several years is that when we have Orono officers who are sort of enculturated in the community policing model, their response is different than when we have an officer who's coming up to assist us through mutual aid. So mutual aid is great, and I'm glad that our officers have that backup. But for me, I have a great amount of, I have a high level of confidence that our officers are going to work in a way that benefits our community because they know our community. And an officer that might come in to assist us in a mutual aid fashion because we don't have enough officers available to respond to a particular incident because of staffing levels or they're otherwise, unavailable, might not respond in the way that we think is appropriate to our community. So in that regard too, although, it's weird to think of community policing as a function of a car. I think I just want our highly trained, community-minded cops to be able to get to the places that need that response without relying on an agency or institution that doesn't maybe practice that model to the extent that we do.
And I think that while maintaining the framework to support the activity level that we have Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, when quite honestly, we probably are not going to have the time to engage at the community level. That is very much response and calls piling up. To have that framework on the one hand, but outside of those times, to really practice and push more towards getting out and engaging is not a bad thing. I'm wondering if it makes sense for it to not be an all or nothing thing.
And I don't think that, just listening, I wasn't thinking of like, shouldn't, this isn't a matter, I don't think, of not having the 4 vehicles, because it's a matter of having a vehicle with 60 that's going to get to 90,000 miles instead of whatever the 30 to, instead of getting rid of it. So it's a matter of having a vehicle with higher miles. It's not a matter of not having those. So I don't think, for me personally, if we use 4 vehicles, I think we need 4 vehicles. I'm getting at whether it's a question of 2 new ones to support that, or and I think perhaps if there is more, maybe not, because if we're only using them on those nights, then they're going to get those mileage on those nights. And if we not that by our walking or biking habits, I think it sounds like that percentage wise, does that make sense? You're using 4 select nights, and you're going to continue to use them. So it's not going to change mileage by us and kind of, or you incorporating foot patrol or bike patrol. It won't change the mileage on those. That's what I think is what I'm hearing. I am curious about like do the other vehicles, the administrative vehicles or the detective vehicles, are those not used for patrol at all, or are they used for patrol?
They are. So in the instance that we're in right now, when the captain and I are working the road like we have been, I'm using my police admin car. This is why we buy them as response type vehicles, so that we can utilize those cars too. So primarily they're not used for response, but right now we are using them in that capacity. And if something got really bad, like if we crashed a car or something like that and we needed more cars, I mean, we do have cars that we could shift and move.
It's not an issue. It looks like the captains and the chiefs do not have this M500 camera.
We do not. No, we're the only two that don't.
Everyone has these anyway.
But we all have our body cams. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But as the one who ends up reviewing complaints that get appealed, so somebody has a complaint on the police department, they talk to the chief, they fill out forms, the chief does an internal investigation, they're not happy with the results of that investigation, that then comes to my desk and I investigate the complaint. And those car cameras are really important because the perspective of a body camera is much different than the perspective of a camera sitting out here looking at an event. And there have been times when that has been a really important perspective for us to have.
That's a quick staffing question, because we've had so much information about fire staffing and you're talking about weekend staffing. What is the basic staffing model for our police force? I know we're understaffed right now, so I'm sure it's not where we'd like it to be. What is our current distribution of how many people are working?
Yep. So on like a Monday through Friday daytime.
So Ben, take a step back and tell us in general how we have staff, what they are, patrol, sergeant.
So we would normally staff with at least a patrol supervisor if we can and a patrol person. So the day shift schedule would look like that, where there would be a patrol supervisor working from 7 in the morning to 5 at night, and a patrol person that would work that same schedule. So you'd have those two bodies working during the day. During the school year, you have your school resource officer in the school. He's going to be there from 7:30 to 3:30. So you have those three bodies, well, one covering the school and two covering the road. Then the chief and the captain would be there, and a detective when we have a detective. And then at nighttime, you would have similar staffing where it would be a patrol supervisor working a shift that's typically 5 at night to 3 in the morning. Patrol person that's working 5 at night to 3 in the morning. And then an overnight person that would work 9 at night to 7 in the morning. So that's typically what it looks like Sunday through Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, we have more staff on.
So even during the week, you typically in those peak nighttime hours have 3
Yep.
as opposed to 2 available. Yep. And then on the weekends, that goes up
Yep.
to 4.
It goes up to 4 and 5.
Okay, got it, thanks.
So I would like to, I think maybe we should, I think the vehicle discussion is not over with yet. And so I think maybe that's something that in our next budget workshop, when we have time to review, we come back to that.
Great.
Because I want to also have enough time to talk about the other suggestions, and then also have enough time to talk about the other emergency services. So the other suggestions that county staff provided for us for potential service level cuts include things like adjusting for crossing guards, the Gould's Landing, staffing model, and then some minor reductions to community policing laws.
So I was curious about how active our contracted use of seaboard security is at Gould's Landing. And this is one of the things that I'm not suggested, because I know that's what we.
No, it was. Oh, yeah, yeah.
But
possible.
So, do you want to take that?
I would say it was implemented at the community's request during COVID times because we found people trying to find ways to get outside, right? In mass quantities. So we found out that a lot of people were going out to the lake, which is a popular place to socially distance and things. And we started to get some feedback from residents out there that lived there, that people with boats and trailers and cars in general were just parking all over the place, and it was crazy. And it wasn't something that we could necessarily manage on our own. So it was something where I think we even got COVID funds in the beginning, correct?
So we did.
Right?
Yeah, I would just back up a little bit to say even before COVID, we were getting complaints from residents out at Pushaw because other communities with access to Pushaw made decisions to not allow non-residents to utilize their beach access or their lake access. So we ended up with hordes of people enjoying the little patch of grass, parking in ways that residents couldn't get through, making, really having issues. And part of our issue is in the summertime, we are an anti-Maine town in that most all other Maine communities, they really get much larger in the summer. And so your police force really amps up. For us, we don't allow people to take vacation and do stuff often during the school year. One of the reasons we get people is because it's easier to take time off in the summer, which then Dan short staffs in the summer, which is great for our bottom line, but it means that it's really hard to get really frequent patrols that go all the way out to the lake and stay within the more densely populated area. So people were frustrated. And when COVID came and there was more of a push to try to get out, and this was the only access that people could have, we used COVID funds for 1 year to staff this security person. And the reason we do security person, it's a lot cheaper for the town than hiring a patrol officer back on overtime. Don't let Seaboard know that, but it is. So I think what you would hear from the community, I have heard, we've had intermittent conversations with folks that live out, especially Hemlock Point and Gould Road. They would tell you that they feel like people who are there to enjoy the park are still enjoying the park, but people who are causing issues, doing things that are not legal to do, breaking things, are no longer choosing to do that out there. We've implemented other things, like we've actually striped parking. We have permits that people have to get. Permits don't cost you anything, but they give a way for us to track who is there. So I don't have data, and we're not asking Seaboard to maintain data. Anecdotally, every summer we are getting a couple of letters or emails from residents out there thanking us for that patrol. It is relatively new service from COVID. And I don't know, those kind of like speeding through BZ. Nobody wants to speed through BZ because they have a reputation. But if you look, oftentimes there aren't any police out because they actually do a whole town, not just Route 2. I don't know if having patrol out there will have created enough of a, that's not a place to do that, or if people will find out very quickly and inundate folks. And that is a population of year-round residents on those two streets that often feel like they get shrift from the town. And that's part of what we've heard as an underlying message when they say thank you. It's thank you. You don't pick up our trash. You don't plow our road.
Give us water. You don't take us to
I don't have a sidewalk. So it's nice. I feel like my tax dollars, I feel like you're hearing my concern. That said, It's not mandatory and it's at council's discretion.
Is it a weekend thing that we get for that price?
It's 40 hours a week. I have it budgeted where it's considered about $1,000 a week. So we have an understanding with Seaboard where if you're looking at the weather tomorrow and it's clearly going to be a rain day, that their people won't go out. So it typically runs from the first budget cycle week in July through July and August. Those are the peak times when people are out there the most. So that's what we would say. It's 40 hours.
So it's 40 hours a week. So it's not necessarily Thursday, Friday, Saturday night.
No, it's daytime hours. We try and pick the peak daytime hours every day of the week.
Park is actually closed at night after sunset. So,
and we don't have as many problems then, you know. So yeah, we try and the framework that we have is during the day when there might be the most people there. A little heavier on the weekends. Like I remember the schedule correctly. It's a full day, like an 8 to 5 on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, where it may only be 5 or 6 hours Monday through Thursday.
And there's no ticketing. They don't write any tickets or do any. So you said there's no data. That's kind of what I was curious about. Do they write tickets? Do we know how many they wrote? But not, this is a comfort level thing. Basically.
This is more about when somebody parks in the wrong place or doesn't park lawn. They go up and tap them on the shoulder and say, you can't park here. If there was a problem, then the person didn't respond to them, then they would call the police for assistance. But what I think we're finding is that it's more about the figure of there's somebody here saying what we can and can't do as opposed to authority or writing tickets or that kind of thing.
To your point on the effect of having done it and your analogy of going through VZ, that is still in my head. I do wonder, and this is maybe splitting hairs as well, but maybe it's we do half a service and there's still a presence and people see them and, you know, who knows, maybe Seaboard, maybe that's they'd be happy because they're like everyone else and can't find resources. Who knows?
But I like that idea.
Maybe that's something to consider. It's not, obviously it's not a huge item. And I know that people out there and I think they have a legitimate, they're paying the same taxes and not getting nearly the same. Well, I guess we do pay sewer bill and water bill. They don't get that. But anyway, I know how they feel a bit stranded out there. So that's something to be said for that as well.
Is there any way that this contract can complement the unfilled position we have for an environmental monitor out there?
So we thought about that. In fact, there was a great deal of conversation. So that position, we have found somebody to do that. The issue with that position is that is a student, and we knew we were driving into more of a younger person to work with an adult volunteer out there for that. And I'm just not comfortable putting a 16 or 17-year-old kiddo out at the
bad guy. Yeah. And you force her.
Where is the environmental monitor position in which budget?
So in no budget, it's 100% grant funded that we just got. And it is through a collaboration with the Greater Pushaw Lake Association. Council approved us applying for that grant. And we just received application that we received it. So it will be a budget adjustment at the beginning of the year to carry forward.
Do we have any other, I want to give enough time to talk to Chief Lowe as well and discuss issues around fire. Do you have any other questions regarding the police budget?
Yeah, just this again, this feels like splitting hairs, but I have the crosswalk at the light position. Anecdotally, every person I've seen walking with a young child, every young child I've seen walking with a parent, that's anecdotally. And that thing that, I feel it's kind of silly sometimes because you go up and you hit the button. and he goes out and you, the light comes on, he goes out and you cross as an adult, that feels weird.
So that position is there, funded in the budget because council wanted it.
Yeah.
The direction that, or the guidance they receive from staff is that it is not a best practice to do that. And that it is unusual to have a crossing guard at a signalized intersection. I do think that there was concern, if I recall, that there was some conflict with right turning traffic at that intersection. And the light, the way the timing of the light is. I know Rob Yerxa is trying to work with Sebago Technics to, as part of the overall project design, try to figure out a way that we can move people through that intersection the way we need to and hold that light without backing people up too much. So even then you end up with this no right on red to totally avoid the conflict. And that would defeat the whole, I mean, so many people use that to take a right on red. As outside of high commute times or peak traffic times, you can sit there and look at Route 2 with nobody going through for a significant amount of time. So it's not a best practice. It is part of a safe route to school. And there clearly at this point is a concern about not having a full stop. And I don't know if Rob will be able to, I know he's had conversations with Sebago. I don't know if we can solve that without solving other traffic issues that will take part of the project to do.
And there's no higher priority than safety for kids, for sure. But this did stem out of, the crosswalk used to be there, you moved it down here, and now we got a light and a crosswalk. And so it's worth considering, you know, and it might be one of those things where every ASA parent comes storming in here and says, you can't do that, which is fine. I think that's obviously everyone's right. But for me as an adult, it feels weird. And most kids, young kids, I see walking with parents. So that was my 2 cents to that.
So just the other piece to that, just in case you're looking at your book, trying to find how much you would save, that is another situation where we budget 100% of the cost and we get 50% back from the RSU. And that covers both Pine Street intersection that you're talking about and the Westwood.
Oh, so it's only really a quarter of that? Oh. I thought that was just
page 8,
that
it
side.
says the savings would be $11,000.
But it says that half of that is paid for by the RSU.
Oh, so no, yeah, so it does say actual savings. Is that correct? Yeah, I guess.
So if we did
50%.
Oh, you're saying the total savings and then 50% of that
Is ours or within our budget.
So how often does
so that
We had a question from John.
Make a historical comment.
Sure.
Traffic engineers will tell you that this arrangement of lights and intersections, Route 16, Forest Ave, Main Street, there's 10,000 cars a day on Main Street. Is it 10?
closer to 19 now, but
19. This is one of the most complex interchanges in the state of Maine in terms of engineering the timing of the lights to get the traffic through in a reasonable amount of time. We moved the crosswalk from the corner of Goodrich to the traffic signal so that the crossing guard's interruption of the traffic flow was consistent with the lights. If you separate the two, the crossing walk guard is one more wrench in the works to get traffic through town safely. The crossing guard will stop the traffic when the kids are there, not necessarily coordinate the lights. We tried to get crossing guards coordinate stopping the traffic with light. That's a level of complexity that's hard to get with a crossing walk. It didn't work. That's why the crossing walk card was moved down to the light. The council at the time felt extremely uncomfortable not having a crossing walk card. In large part because of the right turns off of Pine Street onto Main Street. Kids, you want somebody there that the drivers are seeing that they're there. That was the feeling of the council.
So Jeff, I want to correct myself. It's 19,000 cars total, 11 of them on Route 2. So you were right.
Sarah, do you have a question?
No, it's okay. I'm happy to go.
Okay. All right. So again, we'll revisit all these at the beginning of the following meeting. So if there's other issues, and I do think we'll talk about vehicles again. But I'd like to move on to the fire department section of the budget.
Sorry, one quick one on the training line.
What page there?
Sorry, 9, the next page. It looks like we've spent somewhere around 14 or 15. We budget 22.5 in there. I do wonder out loud if, given how hard it is and short staffed, and I mean, is it conceivable that we're not going to have the bandwidth to be sending? I mean, that 14 or 15 might be a reasonable training based on people coming in and not having spare bandwidth of people to go do training just because we're kind of pinched. So if there is a possibility of keeping that at 20 instead of 22.5.
So I asked that question because I too was looking for money. Yeah, great mind. And what I heard loud and clear from the chief is that we're bringing new people on. The academy has significant costs associated with it, and we're sending at least 2 and hopefully 3, at least 3 and hopefully 4 to the academy next year. And that's $3,000 a piece. So right now, that's 12,000 of that gone just for the academy. On top of that, one of the ways we were able to maintain, I would say 2 things: higher caliber employees who had a really good understanding of best practice and expectations, was that we had a number of people who were certified as instructors in other things. That allowed them to teach people locally here. So we weren't having to send people out for certain types of training. And it also ensured that we were bringing the best information back to the department. Some of those, like we've had turnover, we've lost some people who held some critical certifications for us. Field training officers. We're going to bring a bunch of new people in. I've got to send a couple of people to field training school, because it's not just, hey, you know the job, teach this person. It is a highly structured instructional period. I think the other pieces are drug recognition. So we know that Orono has a pretty high incidence of OUIs and driving under the influence. Given the driving under the influence is becoming more of an issue, we had 2 drug recognition experts. Both of them have moved on. That is a highly specialized course that actually involves 2 pieces. We were able to get some grant funding last year, which is why the budget didn't get hit quite as hard. I'm not sure that grant funding will be available this year. We really need at least 1 person on staff that has that that training to be able to do drug recognition. So if anything, where I started out thinking I wanted to try to cut that line, looking at history, if anything, I think he may have it short, but we're also running short. And so one of the things that we have said to the department is that we are rolling back some of the more elective training and really concentrating on only the training opportunities that we need here to bring our officers up to speed, to ensure that we have the internal capability to train our officers and to meet the community needs, especially around drug recognition.
So you don't think there's room to cut 2,500 out of there? Or that we, and looking historically, we've been below, but for whatever reason. So, I mean, it's not, yeah, not to that, but it's curious.
I think if we have it there, we can utilize it to bring in and host trainings too that might be important to the council too. If I don't have the money, then I can't send people to those trainings. There's a ton of there's some things that we have to go to trainings for that are mandated by our accreditation too. So like Sophie mentioned field training, I'm required to have people that are actually trained. I can't just anoint somebody a field training officer without sending them to a class. So as part of this best practice that we have, we don't just send people to a basic FTO school. We try and send them to, the one that we send them to is at Roger Williams University, actually. It's a college week-long class that we've had really good success with. So, you know, we send them to really, really good trainings and we've had good luck with that. So
fair enough. Thank you.
So we are planning to send 3 more people than we did last year to some sort of training. I don't know what we did.
we are expecting, I have 4 vacancies right now. One's for the detective sergeant that I have a conditional offer out for, and I have 3 open patrol positions. So provided I don't hire anybody that's a lateral that already has the certification, I'm looking at sending 3 to the academy in FY24.
And apologies that I just don't happen to know this. Were there, how many trainings analogous or equivalent were done last year from the same budget line? Or were there any?
For the academy, we sent 1, just 1.
Disclosure.
We have 1 that's graduating tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's just helpful trying to compare previous use of this budget, which was under that like 7,500 item line and then that 15,000 line. There are lots of lines, even if we're not talking about cutting those ones for the reasons you suggest. There are things like cleaning allowance that for each year it's at 2,300, and this past year it's only been used at 900. The previous year was 1,100, and there's lots of items there which have little amounts that I feel like probably could be cut back. Like, and I see this not just in the police department, not just the fire department, in every department. They're like these little amounts that I was just doing a quick calculation, and maybe I'm wrong on some of these, but when I went through lots of small items, not even including actually the training, I didn't even see that. It came out to we could save it, not a lot for public safety. It's like 23,000. But if we did that in every department, and I'm not sure, I haven't looked at the other departments to see what that adds up to, but that could potentially, and I was quite conservative actually in the cuts that I was thinking about in a lot of items like that one in like, where was it? There was, well, there's other ones I can't find now. I wrote them all down. I didn't sticky note them, but I was wondering, you know, if it would be worthwhile to council for me to actually go through the rest of these departments with those in line by line and say what they are, and then we could ask questions of Sophie more generally, like what she thinks about like the feasibility of lots of little cuts that could add up to potentially almost $100,000 if each other department is at this level.
I think I love it, Rob. If you're volunteering to kind of like nickel and dime $100 here out of the budget, go for it.
It's like it's very little. It doesn't involve an actual. I think all the things that I'm looking for wouldn't be a reduction in the normal use of a lot of these little funds.
So I'm not opposed to doing that because I really think take care of the ounces and the pounds take care of themselves, right? I think what we've heard from staff is that this is what they recommend. So if you want to do that, and if we want to do that, we should. And maybe in the same way that Sarah shared a document with me and Sophie that we then shared out to council, that would be. Go ahead.
So council gets to do whatever council wants to do. That's your pleasure as elected officials. I will tell you, cleaning allowance is a contractual obligation that we haven't paid as much out of because we haven't had staff that were here at the times that we would pay out the cleaning allowance.
So that amount is set, not it's absolutely contract.
I also would just suggest that this budget was created by department heads. It came to my desk. I tried to weed out as much as I could And when you start talking about a budget line that has $500 in it, and we only use $250, so budget $250, I kind of come back to the budget is not fixed in a menu of what is going to happen in a given year. And sometimes things aren't expended because, I don't know, the police department or the fire department's been the one has gone way over in its overtime. And the general obligation that I have is to not expend more money than I have been authorized. And so everybody says, we're not going to expend those funds. I would just suggest that if we start nibbling what you perceive as fat, which you are entitled to perceive fat, that I am afraid that what you're going to see is a department head who knows a lot about what their needs are saying, oh, I have $500 left and I'm getting close to budget time. I better spend that, because if I don't have it, if I leave it, then I won't get it next year. And I know that there are things that might happen given that we're 13 months out trying to pass a budget that's I'm gonna have to lose for the next year. I'm afraid of cultural backlash that might have. As a counselor, you have every right to question whatever line you want and to cut wherever you want. It is, I am afraid, because right now you do not have culture here of expending money because it has been budgeted. What you have is a culture of, this is what I think I'm going to need. If I don't need it, I'm not going to spend it. And I'm going to turn back as much as I reasonably can to go into fund balance. So then council can decide if fund balance gets too high to do something different.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate you talking about the incentives that are potentially created by lowering budgets. Generally, I also think in trying to, I mean, obviously you all know more about like the needs of your departments than any of us do. I mean, that's also why we're asking you questions here. But I think we're trying to figure out where large cuts potentially are going to be made, and trying to think about how we could save on some larger cuts by asking you all. And I mean this with all the respect to you all who know more about your jobs than I do, and what you need, trying to figure out where belts could be tightened so that we can cut less of the larger stuff. And I would pretend to know exactly how to solve the problems of the incentives that you just described. I don't know. It's the only thing that's come to mind to me so far for how I could meaningfully contribute to sort of lots of little parts of this that could add up to what it seems to be a significant savings on a budget that continues to grow every year in ways that I don't think that we've still figured out how to account for in the trends of growth. And this wouldn't do much to solve it, honestly. I'm just.
My perspective is that if council wants to, if we need to make a big cut, we need to decide what service we're not going to ask our employees to provide. And, that's it for me. I trust that the staff is in good faith told us what they, in their expert opinion, they need to do the job that we've asked them to do. So if we want to spend less money, we need to ask them to do a different job, not ask them to do the same job with less money. So for me, that's why I think having the discussion about the cruiser is important. The discussion about Gould's Landing is important, because those are the service levels that we've asked them to achieve. And for me, I'm less interested in the training budget number, because I don't feel like this is my personal opinion, I don't feel like I want to cut training. So I'm not interested in cutting that. While I am interested in maybe talking about other big programs,
And I do think, because we're looking at like 3 or 4 3-year history, 4-year history, that's where he's at, and I can see that, but I also understand that we're talking about a $14 million budget. So you start trying to shave it too tight, then you do get in trouble. So I appreciate both perspectives, but when we're looking, and so I just looked at the training one, and we've only spent 15.5, budget 22 every year. Could we cut it back? And I'm thinking on the surface, yeah, we can get 2,500 off that. well, no, we've got 3 new offices. There is definitely stuff that we don't know and aren't privy to. And this year, maybe we spend it all and then some, I don't know, but I don't think it's a whole exercise if someone wants to put themselves through it.
I'm willing to do some of that.
And even if it's, we look at it and be like, decide like, nah, I don't think I could get behind any of these, or like, yeah, maybe we got 5 we want to ask about that's going to cut out 30,000. I don't know. I don't.
To be clear, the cuts that I was thinking about, we're not cutting down to the exact use that's been used every year. I was still leaving what seemed to me, with again my lack of experience, some room for play, and that is with all respect to you all who are suggesting these budgets. But it just seems worthwhile looking at year to year what we're asking people to pay in their taxes. If we're not out using the funds that we're allocating at that level, it seems like a part of our job is to like ask questions about whether or not we could cut those line by line.
So the other thing I would just say, Rob, is that our job is to support the council process. So I'm going to tell you what I think.
I appreciate that.
But I don't want you or anybody else to hear that as we won't support whatever process you're putting forward. I just want you to understand what you think.
And I take your concern seriously. I do.
So I would say, Rob, if there are in the same way that we have received feedback from Councilor Marks and other people, put that list together, share it with us. We'll go through it.
Does it also make sense to maybe go through it with Sophie first for the things that she can eliminate that are actually contractual? And I mean, I just might suggest that.
I'm not always going to be aware of what's contractual.
So the other thing I can do, Rob, that might be helpful to you is to run a new year-to-date if you want to see what we've actually, because this year-to-date was run a month ago.
And I did try to, and I would appreciate that. I also think, like, I try to take into account the fact that some of these, like, it's clear, like, this has not been fully allocated because we're a couple months out.
I think the actual more important for the year to date still, because you still might have someone that pays like we were talking about the other day. So really we got 2 or 3 years of actuals.
I guess I just want to sort of second what Sophie said, that I've worked in environments where that is the case, and it does very quickly incent people to just spend money like mad at the end of the year. I've worked in those situations, and I've actually been very pleased when I've been going through this budget to see how many lines are not spent up to where they could be, which tells me that we have staff that are trying to be very careful with people's money and very parsimonious with things. And I really appreciate that. So I think that is a real concern. So I just want to second that. Onward.
Okay.
Fire department.
Fire.
Fire. Before we start fire, can I ask one really basic factual question on fire?
Okay.
It's on page 26, just staffing levels. I am confused by how many we currently have. It says 25, but it adds up to 27.
It is 27.
Okay, and somewhere else I saw 24. And so it's 27.
So we have 27.
Okay.
So total, yes, total employees except for the 47.
So
24 line staff. 3 in the show.
So Michelle, the admin's at a totally different budget.
Yeah.
So what you have, the reason you see 24 is because that's response.
Okay.
And 3, we call them admin if you, but it's the life safety, the deputy chief, and the public safety director.
Okay, and so this 25 here is just incorrect. We should cross it off on our page and write 27.
You should. Absolutely.
Thanks. I just been so confused with the different numbers. I've been trying to look back and forth and figure it out. And how many safer positions? Just 3? And they all started this year in February? Yes. Is that correct? Yep. Okay, good. I'm now good on numbers. Please go, Chief Lowe. Thank you so much.
One more quick one. These are positions. Do we actually have people filling all these at this point?
Well, we have 3 people in the safer position. We have 2 open positions with people in the process to fill them.
Okay. We're in better shape than police.
Yeah.
Not good.
Can we ask before we begin the discussion about the budget, I want to thank Chief Lowe for putting together the presentation. Can we ask any questions about that? And then we'll jump into the budget.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Quickly done.
For me, the only clarification I would make is that when Chief presented the minimum required staff for every kind of response, I just wanted to point out, we do not have staffing for all of those things to happen simultaneously at any given time. There are not 60 people sitting at the fire department, right? Yeah. Just to be clear.
Who is our life safety inspector, by the way?
Who is it?
Yeah.
I appreciated that breakdown starting on page 6. And I was curious, and perhaps this is in sort of the annual report and I can find data on it somewhere else, but how many instances of like a moderate risk building fire or a hazardous materials response, how many instances of each of these things do we typically see every year?
So in Orono or when we go mutually to other places?
I'm interested in sort of both.
So in Orono in FY23, this is to date, right?
Right.
It's to date. This is to date. We've responded to what would be 22 building fires. Now, when we think of building fires, very often we think of the whole house is going, there's fire out every window. That's not what we define as, that is what we define as a building fire. But a building fire is also if your bedroom catches fire.
Could be smaller in scale.
You get fire on a wall or chimney fires. Those are all considered building fires. So this year we did 23. Last year, this fiscal year, we did 24. The year before we did 16, and in FY20 we did 24.
And those are within the town of Orono, or does that include mutual aid?
Within the town of Orono.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so far this year for mutual aid going out of town, we've responded to 17 building fires, 12 in FY22, and then 15 in FY21, and 16 in FY20.
That's great. Thanks for having all this right at your fingertips. This is like, then.
What did you add? The other one was hazard.
Oh, I was curious sort of about data on all of these, but if there's a place that I can go and find this myself, that might be more efficient than having you read them all to me right now.
Yeah,
unless my fellow counselors are interested.
We can certainly email this data to you, and I would say if you have questions about particular sets or how they're defined or whatever, feel free to reach out to me and I can provide you that.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a question on page 1, just with all the staffing changes, which we've heard about at a lot of different meetings. I'm just trying to sort of get my head on a timeline. So I can see here that in 2021 is when we transitioned from 3 shifts of 5 to 4 shifts of 5. Sophie at some point mentioned we had 3 shifts of 4 much further back. How long ago was that?
I want to say that changed in 2015 or 16.
Okay, so that was 2015 or 16. It went to 3 with 5 people. And then in 2021, we went to 4 shifts with 5 people. And then with the safer people, have we now shifts of 6? Have I also heard that mentioned? Okay, so we're currently at 4 shifts of 6. We've kind of worked our way from 3 shifts of 4 to 3 shifts of 5 to 4 shifts of 5 to 4 shifts of 6.
And let me get you a date on the.
That's helpful. And as far as our other positions, the life safety and fire chief and deputy, have we always had all 3 of those, or have those also come on in recent years, the deputy and fire safety positions? What's the timing on those?
So life safety, you could go back to 2014, and probably even before that, Henry Vaughn was a life safety inspector here for years and years and years. And that has been an off response position for at least as long as I've been here. We ran with a fire chief and a life safety / deputy chief for a long time. When we made the fire chief the public safety director, and that is a whole other discussion, we brought on a deputy fire chief at that point, separate from the life safety.
That was what year?
That would have been 21, 22. Okay, we would have seen it the first time.
So we split from 2 to 3 administrative positions in 21, 22, somewhere there.
Yeah, it happened in 21. The first time you see it in the budget is 22.
Okay. Thanks. And on page 2, I had one and then I'll let someone else go. I just wasn't entirely clear as I'm looking at, there was overtime information and then something about number of times we've needed to hire back. And I don't know what that means when you say hire back. I was wondering if you could tell me.
So there are certain events that occur or incidents that occur that we need to bring staff back. So if we are called to Bangor, for example, for a building fire, we will bring, or Old Town is a more frequent occurrence. We will have off-duty staff come back and fill in at the station. So there are people staffing our equipment and able to manage calls in Orono. That's what a callback is. We'll do that for mutual aid calls, like I just talked about. We'll do that for full-scale hazardous materials incidents that we have to go to. We will do that if there is 2 ambulance calls at one time that come in, that strips our staff. So we try to bring people back that way. That's the predominant use of callback for us.
But it's billed differently than regular overtime, or is it all billed to the overtime budget?
No, it's got its own budget line.
Okay, so callback is different than overtime. Are you paid more for?
No, it's, I mean, you get paid overtime. The contract says if you come back for a callback, you get a minimum call of 4 hours. But we want to track that to see, which is why you see so many different wage lines in police and fire. It's a way for us to also track how those wage dollars, those extra dollars are being spent without having to dig into multiple budget reports, financial, Great.
Kind of generally, we've spoke about kind of overworking people and also just people's life change and not into the overtime, maybe like they used to be. But to go from 3 shifts of 4 people to 4 shifts of 6 people, can you kind of give a little more color as far as what else drove that besides just people not wanting to do overtime? I assume there's more to it as far as maybe we're doing it. I don't know if we've always had 2 ambulances. I don't know if there has been any structural changes that have also driven this.
So I think not wanting to do overtime is a symptom of a problem. I don't think it's the problem, which is kind of the way I interpreted what you threw out there. It's a symptom of a bigger problem, which is really the number one thing is provider fatigue. Really, our call volume is up significantly. There are studies that talk about if you have a busy 24-hour shift and you go on to another 24-hour shift, which is typically how we run overtime, your production capacity decreases by like 30%. So it creates a risk not only for our staff but for the public in general. So there's that issue with the interrupted sleep and those types of scenarios. The other thing is it's really hard on the work-life balance when we're really slamming people with overtime all the time. And we want people to be able to go home and see their families and to have decompression time and those types of things. And we were really whipping our people when we had the 3-shift model. We were really whipping our people bad because they would work a lot of overtime to cover the trucks. And then they're very often involved in other things like training or coming back and delivering programs or working on projects or those types of things. So there would be people that would be in the fire station 5 days a week into not only for their 24-hour shifts, but they would be back 8 hours for this or 6 hours for that, or they come in for 2 hours because they didn't get to finish a project and they had to come back and take on a project and stuff. So that really drove a lot of the change to go to the 1 on 3 off. The other thing is we needed to stay competitive with the labor market. All of the fire departments around us, we were one of the last ones. Old Town was the last one. We were one of the last ones in this general area to go to that. We'll call it 1 on 3 off shift is basically what it is. And we were losing people and we weren't attracting people. I shouldn't say we were losing. We weren't attracting people to the organization because of the schedule and how it laid out. So, that combined with concerns about mental health and all the other things. It just all kind of culminated so that when we negotiated 1 year, it was recognized on both sides of the table that it's an issue, and that's how we got to address it. So it really drove a lot of was starting to really drive bad morale, and it was starting to have negative impacts. I think we changed it probably just the right time to present some of that backslide.
Work fatigue was kind of the crux of the
100%.
So as somebody who has a little bit more history before you get to you explained the 3 shifts to 4 shifts. Mm-hmm. But even before that, when I got here, Leo, we had 4 shifts, 3 shifts of 4. That was minimum staffing at that point. Minimum staffing by contract has been 4 people at a time, which meant every time we had an overtime, when we were at 3 shifts of 4, we were backfilling overtime. So we had the idea of bringing on we brought on floaters to extra people to bring on floaters. So what we had was 3 shifts of 4, 3 shifts of 4 with float people to try to fill in overtime. And the plan had been to go to 3 shifts of 5 so that we could drop, much like we're doing now with staffing to 6 and dropping to 5. We showed on paper we were going to actually save a little bit of money. And then Maine EMS changed its protocol and our call volume spiked so that we had to run more people on a call, which meant that management then made the decision that a safe staffing level wasn't dropping to 4, it was dropping to 5. So we only dropped to 5. The contract says we can drop to 4. We only dropped to 5 because of the complexity the type of calls we get compared to what Maine EMS is telling us we have to run for providers on a call. And which is why we're now at we're having 6 people trying to drop to 5 to be able to save the overtime and not drive people with tons of overtime. So that is what the SAFER grant is trying to give us, the opportunity with non-tax dollars to test the assumption that we are going to be able to save significant overtime to make it reasonable to bring those people on as regular employees.
I was going to ask about that. I don't believe that. I would love to see that if we really are. I mean, I understood to save people's minds and keep people healthy and not have them burn out. That makes more sense to me. I would be interested to see if it works out and trust if this is a SAFER grant, we must have to be. Do we have to actually literally show that or no? Is like, oh, no. Okay. I mean,
so as costs go up and the world changes, that might not happen. But when you ask for why people did things, we moved to 4 shifts because we were really not being fair to our employees. When we talk about dropping from 6 to 5, that is also about trying not to bring people in. When it comes on overtime.
So you keep saying that, and I think you told me what it meant. When you say dropping 6 to 5, meaning there's 6 people on the shift, it's okay if one doesn't,
yep.
One calls out.
If one calls out, we don't call for overtime.
Dropping to 5.
Yep. And when you ask what people were thinking and what the council's decision was and why they made that decision, it was also the almost $100,000 in the hole that we were running in overtime expense. So I think it's a combination of both, but the money was part of it.
And my question wasn't what was council thinking. My question was what in the industry has affected this. That I mean, that's a pretty big difference. Obviously, 3 shifts of 4 to 4 shifts of 6. So that was more like what. And there's something you said something about main EMS change that impacts it too. That's kind of what I was trying to understand in my mind.
I think
it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, I think in many ways, when you look at it's good to look at trends, to look at budgets, and to look at expenses, but the world that we're providing services in is changing all the time. And main EMS is a very good example of where regulations and expectations continue to grow that demand more resources at the local level to be able to ensure we can maintain licensure.
Unfunded
Mandate, I think is what we call it.
I felt like, go ahead, B, are you done? Are you sure?
Yep.
I found this presentation really, really helpful. I think one of the things with the fire budget that's been challenging is that it is complicated. All the factors that you're dealing with that are shifting and changing. And it is, when we look at the big picture data trends that we looked at, it is clearly one of the drivers of how our costs have gone up so much, because it is where most of our personnel have been added. So I think, for us as counselors, and I think for the public, it's really good to try to understand as clearly as possible what's driving that. I actually, before you made your lovely presentation, and I'm just going to pass this, I didn't put any numbers in here. I know I don't want to make anybody get hives after this. It's just a grid of the questions that I had. And I don't know if anybody else has them, but I was going to just pass it along. A lot of them are answered by your presentation, but not all. And I do think that in terms of understanding the big picture of, pass them that way, of how we like what is causing our expenses to grow so much in this area. These are the questions that occurred to me that would help me to understand it. Even with everyone's answers, I still feel like I can't quite get a full picture. So I'm really just sharing them in case they're useful as we continue talking about this. If there's any other questions that, there are answers to that might help us. But in the meantime, if they're interesting to no one else but me, then I won't worry about them further.
I'm going to ask that maybe Sophie and I, or Sophie respond to you and I about this, and she can consult with staff rather than,
I think you never did, but I just put them on there because I didn't know at the time.
Yeah,
ever had.
The only other thing I would say is it's a work base hours have never been 37, it's 42.
I just did the math on whatever I had. So correct away. This is not my saying I know anything. It's my saying, here are my questions. And I put them in a grid because that's how I, as a person, could see like, oh, this is the benefit we're getting out of this new staffing. It may actually be mental health only, but I suspect it's more. From what you guys have said to me, I actually think there's financial benefits also, and ambulance services we're billing and all these other categories. And I think it could be really useful for us to see, like, here's all the benefits and here's all the costs from shifting from model to model, which I'm sure you guys have looked at, but us as a council, at least I'm brand new, but a lot of us are new. And I don't think most of us know like all the benefits we're getting from the shifts that we've made. So anyway, I'm just going to share that. And my only other question is on some other part of the budget, I noticed that I know we get this amount of money from the university that is not that they have to pay, they just do pay us money as a town, which is very nice. I'm really glad they do it, but it looked like it stayed flat for the last 4 years or whatever the data was there.
So I will say that we got notice in 2013 that we would continue to get the base funding and they were not escalating it anymore.
Ever?
The notice we got in 2013 was that they were not going to do it. There have been conversations at the council level about trying to have conversations with council, with the university. At the staff level, I have had conversations about the fact that this has not grown and that it would be nice if we could reach some kind of agreement, maybe not in a huge jump, but at least in an escalator. So those conversations are being had at the staff level. you know, council can do what council wants, as I've said that many, many times. We've just started that conversation this year at the same time. And what I'm always told is the news, we are right. Enrollment is down, the budget is really tight, and it's a fine dance. The other thing that also comes up is there's a lot of other nonprofit property in Orono. We have talked periodically about adopting an ordinance that does allow the town to bill pilots to nonprofits. The concern had been for a while that we hadn't had standardized assessed values for them. We got that with the, well, if we're not taxing them, I can understand why we wouldn't necessarily have standardized values. But so there is a mechanism in state law that would allow us to look at creating essentially mandatory pilots for nonprofits. You would find the University of Maine is exempt from that.
I think it's important. I'm glad you're in those conversations, because I think especially when we're looking at our public safety budgets and, you know, how much they've needed to grow to meet the needs, I feel like we need to go back with the same thing. I hope that, you know, that page kind of data about this is how much it's grown, and some of Sonia's questions about numbers of types of calls, you know, is part of that negotiation with them, just to really legitimately say to them, this has grown tremendously. And, you know, I would hope that they would want to help with that in some way, because they are a big chunk of.
So I wouldn't characterize it as a negotiation with the university. I think it's a conversation with the university, because I don't think, we certainly don't have the power to dictate that. Absolutely. And it's voluntary. So I think we should, I agree with you. I think we should 100% continue to have those conversations, but I'm really cautious about characterizing that as a negotiation.
Wrong word on my part. Totally fine. Conversation. It doesn't matter to
only
me.
because I don't want to have an adversarial
Absolutely
or competitive relationship with the university.
No, but it would be nice to at least ask, because I noticed those numbers haven't budged and our numbers have budged a lot. That was my only point. Good.
All right. So let's look at questions that people have regarding specific lines in the fire budget. Maybe Chief and Deputy Chief can talk about with us.
Can I ask, did you give this to everybody?
Yep.
I had requested information to kind of look at us compared to Old Town. And I appreciate it. It's good to know that they've got basically the same number, 24, 6 dropped to 5, just like us, 4 shifts of 6, just like we do. They don't have a life safety inspector. Do they not have to have one?
No, so we have to, so the way it works with the state is, the first thing you have to understand is when it comes to fire code, the fire chief is ultimately responsible, unless that duty is either delegated down or through council action or legislative action, that duty is relegated to somebody else. So in smaller towns, very often what happens is that duty is relegated off to the code enforcement officer in smaller communities. In larger communities like us or Bangor or Auburn, where I came from, there is a separation at a certain point between code enforcement and life safety, because the codes become very complex. Building code, which Pat, the code enforcement officer here, looks at, pretty much talks about how the building is built. What's the foundation look like? What's the setback from shoreline? Driveway appropriate? Those types of things. We talk about life safety. What we're looking at is more about what are the safety features of the building? How is it going to allow people to get out? Are sprinkler systems in place? Are occupant notification devices in place? Are there appropriate means to get out of the building? Are the interior finishings appropriate for flame spread? Those types of things. So what happens is, because there's such a volume of information that has to be researched and gone through, those jobs split out, which is very often why a fire chief doesn't take the primary role in that, because there is so much to that. So for the life safety inspector here, there's a couple different functions that this person fills. Number one, it's that inspection piece to make sure that those buildings are compliant. So we inspect buildings from the university down to 3 family buildings, 3 apartment buildings here in town, to new construction, all those types of things. That's what the life safety inspector does here in Orono. The life safety inspector here also does plans review. So when I'll use Tyler Technologies as an example, because they're already underway, everybody knows about it. What they will do is they will bring plans in for review to the town. The code enforcement officer will sit and review those plans. At the same time, the life safety officer will sit and review the plans as well. And the reason they do that collectively is that if problems are found during the planning phase, they can let Tyler know ahead of time before they actually start construction. So that's kind of that community piece that we talk about. We talk about community inspections or community planning, those types of things. The volume of work and the complexity of fire code really drives whether or not you have an individual that's set aside from doing that. There's no way that either Kevin or I would be able to go out and do, and I'm not saying you're suggesting that, I'm just saying that is a workload that would not be able to pick up without somebody specifically managing that program.
What does Old Town do then? So it can be a chief or it can be a code?
It can be a chief or a code officer, and what they've done is they've transferred it up there. Their code enforcement department does it, and I don't know how many people they have in code enforcement up there. But with our one person here, there'd be no way we could use it.
And I do not believe they have any kind of an inspection program.
Not like the fire side, yeah.
Yeah, like we have where we do multifamily and those types of things. I think it is, we have councils long before I got here adopted expectations for inspection and fire prevention activities that Old Town simply just doesn't have.
So like when they built their school up there or a restaurant opens up there, is that something here where the life safety goes through, but there it's just part of what code does?
It's part of what code does.
Thank you.
Sorry,
and hazardous material team, that's not a separate team, that's just, is it trained, just training that?
It's training that all the firefighters go through. We all have to have hazardous materials training.
Gotcha. Right, thanks.
So one of the lines that jumps in here is on page 42, it's the fire protection fee line, deals with the fees assessed by Board of Water District, and I was hoping you could just clarify that.
So I'm going to put my former water district superintendent hat on. When a water system is built, if it were only to be built to provide potable water to customers, it would be sized and operate much smaller than what public water supplies systems are built. Instead, they are built to support fire suppression activities. Because of that, long ago, the state of Maine Public Utilities Commission passed a rule that said towns are responsible for shouldering a % of the operation and maintenance of those larger sized systems, because it's only being built bigger because towns need it. And the ratepayers shouldn't have to pay all that additional cost. There is a whole curve that can be, there's a formula with a curve that can dictate exactly what that percentage should be. Most communities in Maine fall in the 30%, which is the maximum percentage that can be allocated as a fire protection fee. When there is a rate case or a district wants to establish a rate, because it is a regulated entity, it has to go through the Public Utilities Commission to set that rate. As part of that, they establish the fire protection fee. So it's not our job to double check that it's the right rate, because the PUC and their much smarter folks do that. when the rate changes, that new fire protection fee is established for the town. It's an assessment. We don't have a choice to pay it. And the only way that we could change what it is if the council, the community engaged in the district's rate setting process. So it's a lot like a school assessment in that way. So the Orono Water District, the Old Town Water District has changed its rates several times since I've been here. We don't really see a lot of that because our total bill to the Old Town Water District for the small amount of service they provide in Orono is, I think, under $5,000 a year. Orono VZ, we are a lion's share of where their lines are. Mm-hmm. So at last check, Orono VZ had one of the lowest water rates in the state, which on the one hand seems like it's wonderful. On the other hand, it means they've gone a really long time without a rate increase. And they are going through that process right now. Last year, I knew they were going through that process. So I budgeted some extra money in that budget line because there's nothing that says I have to know about it before July 1st and it will be implemented effective July 1st. That could take place anytime the Public Utilities Commission agreed to. So at that point, I added some to the budget. You will notice when you go through that we haven't spent it because they have not submitted rate and it's been adopted and it has been implemented. So the number that you have in the budget is based on the district is looking at a span of, I'm going to get it wrong right now, I think it's 15 to 20%, might be 10 to 15%. I use the upper end of that new rate. So some of it I had already budgeted last year that didn't get used, in the budget. But I don't know that they're going to come in that high. I'm hoping that we'll have an idea before we need to adopt a budget. But if I don't need it, they'll adjust down. I had a conversation with Boyd this week, and they still have not reached a decision as to what that will be. On the one hand, I would advocate for less is best when I'm paying the bill. But on the other hand, I see how much our expenses are going up in the WPCF for the same exact service. And I see where we are because we didn't want to raise rates quickly. And I think that they're probably in a place that they're gonna have to go for.
It's the polar opposite service, technically. It's not the same exact service.
Oh, yeah. I hear you.
Let's not mix the
It's
two.
Pipes.
It's not mix the two.
It's pipes, it's,
Yeah.
it's pumps, it's process, it's treatment. I get you.
On the back of Leo's just about, I was curious, I know we do bill communities for our ambulance or EMS services. Are any of these other services that we have that, Old Town doesn't, or that I'm reading about as I read through the narrative from the chief about that we're the hazardous materials provider for Penobscot County or something, the hazmat provider for Penobscot County, and we do the confined space rescue for Humane every time they have to deal with a facilities issue. Are we getting fees for any of those other than the EMS services or not?
Yep. So if you notice, hazmat is in a different fund.
I was curious if we're getting some fees from that.
Funds, hazmat lives in its own fund because it's known as a special revenue. Technically, it's part of the general fund. However, what we have is a donation of $32,000 a year that comes in from Penobscot County and $7,500 a year that comes in from the University of Maine. So if we respond, I'm just talking about the money because Chief likes me to talk about money. You can talk about process.
$15,000 a year from the state as well.
$15,000, but that's not in that fund. That's in the grant fund because it's a grant.
But it comes in because of hazmat.
Yeah,
We get another
so,
15,000 from the state. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what those dollars mean though, because when we accept them, we're accepting some responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
So we run all of our operations on that special revenue fund in hopes of being able to track and make sure that we are mitigating the amount that the residents in Orono are subsidizing hazmat. We are because we're paying all the hourly rates, but you know, for people to train and you know when people are here. But when we accept the $32,000 from Penobscot County, what we are saying to Penobscot County is if there is a spill anywhere in Penobscot County and we can clearly identify a responsible party, we are going to bill for that. If you call us out, we will go. So if there are spills that we cannot get reimbursed for in Penobscot County's $32,000 annual contribution means that we don't go back after Penobscot County for those bills. And it also means, because if somebody calls us from Ellsworth, which is not in Penobscot County, and they, I don't know, perhaps have a white powder incident at a bank, and their chief calls because they want our hazmat team, my first question is, who's going to pay the bill? Because running that hazmat truck is not cheap. So that's what Penobscot County gets. We don't ask that initial question. The second thing is the university gives us that $7,500 a year for their hazmat, a contribution to hazmat. And what for them, we don't bill the University of Maine for any hazmat calls we run on campus. They're paying ahead, essentially. And there are years that we go without any hazmat calls.
Insurance policy.
They have decided to run it like an insurance. Otherwise, if we run outside of Orono, like we just ran up to a little bit past Rockwood, Deputy Chief was working on the bill that we sent to the state to send to the railroad to get reimbursed for that, which is the other reason why we run it as its own fund. So when we get more money in than we have expended, it lapses to reserve. There are years when there's a negative number and it automatically pulls from reserve. So it acts like more like a proprietary fund.
And typically, do we end up about even on that over a 5-year time period? Do we make money, lose money? Where do we end up?
I think we are even or a little, if we're up, I hate using that because there are lots of long-term expenses that we probably don't even see right now. So with that, the state of Maine, this is a state of Maine team, so the state can call us. And for that, we in the past have gotten $15,000 a year. That's going up to 25 coming up for starting in July. They run October, but it's for our FY24. And the way that works is they work through operational needs. We have a gas detector that goes down. We bought half a pickup truck with some of those funds. We use those funds for reimbursables, which is why we can run a hazmat team on a budget of $39,500 a year.
Okay, so is it just then the EMS services and the hazmat where we're getting income in, or is there something else in the fire department I should also understand where we get income in?
Pretty much hazmat. Yeah, it's hazmat and EMS is the only revenue stream.
Thank you.
And if you're looking at the revenues to offset that, total between patient billings, our contract with VZ, and our billables for providing ALS advanced life support backup or responding in communities as part of mutual aid to communities that our contracted, our mutual aid partners being contracted and paid to provide services in. All of those 4 things combined, we bring in about $425,000 a year total.
And the EMS.
Yes.
Okay. And on the hazmat, do you know?
That is very wide ranging. So we have gone years with nothing. And then I want to go back to the Ellsworth white powder call. I think that call alone brought in almost $4,000. You really
did the state buy the truck or did we buy the truck? How did that?
The truck was purchased through Homeland Security funds back in 2007, I want to say.
But I don't think we own that truck. I think the state owns that truck. We need to have a conversation. Because if we own it, we don't have a title.
Glad I asked. Thank you.
Other fire questions?
Yeah. Are we back in the schools? There was a thing in here that said, we stopped that because of COVID.
This fall, we're working on retooling the program. So we have students coming up to visit us, but this fall,
no fireman Dennis on the end of last close of school. That is a huge hit.
Is it?
For the record.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So
I mean, that's a fireman field day, but I mean.
Yeah, our intention is to start spinning some of that back up this fall and through the school year.
I think we're in the school in a little bit different way too. I know we just went up and did reading and we've done talks and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we went up to the high school for some conversation with students about getting into the fire and EMS services.
That's a great point. I was thinking about that for police only because my son's kind of interested and I've been asking people I know and stuff. But and obviously it's a hard, whether it's planting seeds, obviously, because although maybe they can go straight up. But I was curious if we headed to high school for that. So that was one thing. And the other thing, which is in the write-up that I don't want to, I know we're getting late, but the community paramedic thing, I'd be interested to hear conversation about that. I'm interested. I'm wondering if it can be done creatively at first, or grants, and or pick a slow day. And I'm wondering how creative we can get with that. I think it's because I was the one asking about the town nurse and bemoaning the fact that we don't have it. And but I also think it builds to the whole issues that you described. So many more calls, 75% are medical. There's a lot to be said for preempting that with health visits and maybe that it just I think even in your notes or whoever's notes, it's a national issue. There doesn't seem to be any answers. To me, that feels like a potential answer that we could really do ourselves a lot of justice by doing health stuff and lessening, ideally, calls that are going. I think it's maybe this isn't the time to have this conversation, but thank you for putting it in there. I think it's a valuable conversation to have at some point and thinking of creative ways that we can do that.
I'd be interested in talking more about it again, perhaps more linked another time too, but thanks for bringing it up, Leo.
I think as part of the budget right now, we don't see a way that we can do that without adding staff. And Jeff has kind of sliced this many different ways. I do think though, that a conversation where Jeff could talk you through what is involved with community medicine, paramedicine, what the benefits might be, how it works in other places. I think that would be a wonderful use. I would say that it's probably something that we would be working up to either try to find grant funding to try, or to look at in a future year's budget. But I do think that conversation would be good now so that we could understand if that's a direction you want to go for our grant writer extraordinaire to know that and be on the lookout. But I think a conversation is important, because what wouldn't work is to have 7 ideas of what a community paramedicine program would look like, because I think there are some things that it can't do that I think people might want it to do, and other things that it could do that you might not be thinking of.
Yeah, so not right now, you're saying, but I mean, I think I am most definitely interested to hear the details of what it could be, what it could do, what it couldn't do. And I just think it's a really smart direction to go based on everything you put in here about what we're called to do now on a regular basis, 75% being that. So, great.
I want to say thanks you for all the information, really super helpful, especially appreciated the presentation that came by email. And if there are easily accessible answers to any of the questions on my grid, I'd love to see them as I'm going into this budget decision, but certainly not if it's hours and hours and hours of someone's time. But I would like to ask, before we get around to reviewing SAFER grants a couple of years from now, if we could get a grid like that really shows us, you know, the number effects for each of these different patterns, that would help me to make decisions. Thanks.
As you all appear to be winding down, I am going to just ask, we are all here to support your process, and I'm glad that I have an amazing senior team who would answer all your questions and have asked you or suggested you just reach out to them. In order for me to keep track of what has been asked and try to get information back out, I would ask you to please not go directly to the senior team. I would ask you to please ask your questions through me. And then if it's a written document I can get back or a presentation we can plan, that way everybody has the same information as opposed to one person having the benefit of a 15-minute conversation or a 15-minute conversation times 7.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. And I know that sometimes people have asked questions through me, which I send directly to Sophie. Sometimes people ask questions directly to Sophie. I think both of those ways are appropriate, but I think it's smart to share as much of that information back out to the full council. So however we can do that most efficiently is best.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And we will, at our next meeting, we'll follow the same protocol where we review some of these ideas and service levels change.
Here where you sat here all night.
Oh, he heard all your questions. I heard all your questions. The only other thing I will say is I'm going to plan on trying to have some snacks for you next week, because next week's probably will go. I'm going to guess maybe we could do half of it, take a mini break to whatever, and then come back. What I don't want to do is last year we ended up bringing Ron Dirksa back like 4 times because we kept getting cut off, and I would prefer to try not to do that. This is his absolute busy season right now.
And next week's is public infrastructure or what's?
Yep. So next week we're going to do WPCF, and I will send some more stuff that we normally would give as part of the presentation. I will send that out prior to. I don't know if I'll get to it this weekend, but I will get it out. So it's WPCF, Public Works, which includes general maintenance, winter maintenance, environmental services, which has all of the solid waste and science stuff, fleet maintenance, which includes not only the maintenance of the fleet in terms of the mechanic and the setup, but also the building itself and all of the capital infrastructure and equipment. It also will include facilities and capital facilities projects.
And the capital expense line was the other one that had gone up pretty significantly over the last 3 years. Will we have some data, not just about what we're being asked to do for capital expenditures in 24, but also a bit about what happened this year and last year to put that in some context for us about what the plan is?
So you've got the 5-year plan that I can, if you're interested in that, you can go back. It's on the website as part of the adopted documents. The other thing I will send you is a link. I don't know if it will come out on Monday, on Friday or Tuesday. We actually have a story map for you of capital infrastructure. This is the first year, we're trialing it. So I'm not saying it's perfect. I don't even know if it's 85%. If Rob's giving it to me, I'm gonna guess it's pretty high percent. But it will allow you to see not only a little bit of what we have done, but also the plan.
That's great. Yeah, I think it'd be great for all community members to be able to see kind of what's been happening with that capital money, which has been really important.
So at this point, my plan would be, I think, to give you a link to test it. And if it is all that we think it is, we can then connect it to the website for everybody else. Thank you.
Does it make sure to make sense to ask if there's any public comment?
Yeah, that's the last thing I was going to ask before we go. Well, thank you. Yeah. So if there is public comment from people in-house or people online, we'd love to hear it. Yes, Jeff.
I'm always good for public comment. I hope you're all coming to appreciate the thoughtfulness which goes into this budget. And the staff are, in my opinion, absolutely amazing. And the encyclopedic knowledge that they pass out to in the past 2 meetings that I've been in anyway is just nothing short of amazing. The thoughtfulness that goes into this budget is something that's remarkable. That's my time.
I was actually going to say exactly the same thing, so I won't repeat it, but it's repeated.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any public comment online, Bill?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, thank you. All right. With that, we'll close our workshop for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.